series. They're going to get back for two. India at home. Lords goes wild.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of 81 All Out Podcast. We are back after a mini hiatus, which was totally unplanned, but better late than never. So, in the lead up to the India's Test series of New Zealand coming up, as part of our memory series, we're looking back at India's tour of New Zealand in 98-99, specifically the Test series, but we'll also touch upon the one-day series a little bit. To look back on that series, we have a couple of guests today with us. Aftab, who's an 81 All Out regular, you all know. Hi, Aftab.
Hi, Mahesh. Good to be back.
Welcome back. And we have a new guest today coming from Chennai, Karthik Jayaraman. Hi, Karthik.
Hi, Mahesh. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
We always welcome knowledgeable Chennai cricket fans.
I was waiting for that. Thank you.
Anyway, let's get started. Let's start with some background about your life and about your personal experience of watching that series. This is India's tour of New Zealand in 98-99. Tell us something about what you're doing in life at that time, and what are your memories of watching that series, and if you have any interesting anecdotes about watching that series. Aftab, do you want to get started?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So this happened when I was in class 10. So memorable time, something that you don't necessarily forget. And if you're growing up in India during the 90s, it was all the more crucial time of your life because you were getting ready to give board examinations, and anyone who's grown in that era will know, the hype that both your parents as well as your school created around board exams. And this tour kind of came just around the time when we had this whole, elaborate ritual of pre-boards happening in, December and happening in January. And for some reason, during that year, my school decided that they needed to have two sets of pre-boards, one before the Christmas break and one after January. So my parents would give me very awkward looks every time the television would be switched on to watch cricket during that period. And in this case, it was being switched on fairly early on in the morning. So interesting times. I won't talk about what happened on the pre-boards, but I somehow managed to pull through and watched a fair amount of cricket. And then, obviously, the other memory is it was winter in North India and fairly cold in the morning when you wake up and watch the cricket. And that, to me, has always been one of my favorite cricket watching memories, just cuddling up in a blanket with the television on. Just gives you this great sense of warmth. And New Zealand was special because the cricket would start the earliest. You sometimes had to wake up at like 3:30 in the morning to do it. And watching Test cricket required a lot of dedication.
Good. Funnily, I was also in Delhi at the time. And honestly, I didn't enjoy waking up at 4 o'clock in that winter, even though I enjoyed watching the cricket early in the morning. The winter was just too painful for that. Karthik, what about you?
Coincidentally, even I was in Delhi back then. So I was brought up in Delhi. I did my university in Delhi. So before I moved to Chennai, quite a lot of memories coincide with what Aftab just said. I just joined university, and waking up early morning around 3:30 a.m. to make sure I don't miss anything about the series, because I had a bad experience with the South African 96-97 tour when 15 minutes or 20 minutes of the live coverage, if I missed, it was probably 3 or 4 wickets down. I didn't want to miss any action. So I was very, very particular that I don't miss anything. So I got up on time. I was pretty excited because I genuinely thought India had a good team, had a decent team to compete. And I was excited about that series. We'll talk about it as we go along, but the cold winter mornings in Delhi to experience an Australia or a New Zealand series, that those memories are really special.
98 was a very interesting year for India, and in many ways a breakthrough year for Sachin, who was already great, but he kind of went from hero to god during the course of this year. And we just had a very, very impressive win at home against Australia, which was widely followed, widely reported. Bradman talked about it, Chappell talked about it. Greg Chappell said Sachin could walk out to bat at the stump and he'll still do all right. And Pepsi even made an ad out of it. So it was that period of sort of an insular high for India, followed by the heartbreak of a loss in Zimbabwe. To an extent, perhaps it didn't feel that bad, possibly because it was not telecast. If I'm not wrong, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I know it was painful, but somehow because we didn't watch the second innings collapse, I guess the pain of that is relatively lesser compared to the other heartbreaks that we've seen. One of it has given the name to this podcast. And we start the series with a terrible loss against Central Districts, where I think India was all out for 100 odd in the first innings. Salvaged to some extent by a brilliant innings from Sachin in the second innings. Brilliant, I'm just going by the Hindu report. Honestly, I don't think it was telecast either. But it was like better than a run-up ball 100 or something. And then come to the first test, it was fully washed out. So, the test series was kind of, gave a sense of optimism about India's chances, because India was coming off the high of the success against Australia, plus the team was doing relatively well. We had a couple of decent fast bowlers. Kumble was bowling well. So what was your impression going into the series? Were you nervous? Did you give India any chance at all?
So I was actually very confident going into the series, which was unlike any of my pre-series feelings at any point of time in the 90s. And I think it was a combination of things. One was it was just overconfidence that, it's New Zealand, right? It was like, I think I felt that just because Pakistan beat them easily, so would we. And in the 90s, despite, I never really realized the talent gap between India and Pakistan, what it was. It took the next series at home for that to really hit home. But I think the other thing also was just what you spoke about, the fact that the team was coming off a relatively good run, particularly in one-day cricket. Right? They had been really successful. We had won the Desert Storm in Sharjah. We had done well at home in the triangular series with Australia, where we ended up choking in the final. We won the Nida Haas Trophy in Sri Lanka. We had a very comprehensive victory in one of those ubiquitous Coca-Cola Cups in Sharjah around October, November, where Zimbabwe and Sri Lanka were playing. And I remember, in fact, in the final of that tournament, when the presentation was done and the trophy was given to Azhar, he actually mentioned that, the team is really excited. There's an away series coming to New Zealand, and it's a great chance for them. And I think the only thing that concerned me was that Agarkar ended up missing that tour, and he probably got injured after that Sharjah tournament and between the New Zealand tour. And he had kind of been the find of the year in '98. He was excellent with the new ball in one-day cricket, particularly troubled Jayasuriya, who before that was just murdering our bowlers.
But it was kind of a bittersweet moment, because the guy who replaced him was Robin Singh Jr., who was my best friend's sister's colleague in income tax office. And we were really pumped for him because we had spoken to him, etc., etc. So I thought that, maybe this could be his breakthrough. I was worried about the fact that New Zealand had won in Colombo before, and it's under Fleming, they were like really coming up as a confident side. So I knew it wouldn't be very easy, but things turned out differently.
Interesting point about Robin Singh. Just two things, Mahesh, before we move on. One, Delhi boy, and debut was a little late. I think he was about 28, 29 when he debuted. And he's, and again, this is typical 90s, right? He's one of those bowlers who plays one test and then just vanishes into oblivion. You never hear about him again. So you can add him to the list of David Johnsons, Dodda Ganesh, some of the others. Harvinder Singh may be another one there.
Yeah, there is this interesting trivia about Robin Singh Jr. I think he was test cap number 218 or 217. I don't remember, but the previous test cap to Robin Singh Jr. was none other than Robin Singh, actually, who debuted
Robin
in
Singh Senior,
Zimbabwe.
yeah, in
Yes.
Zimbabwe. Yep, you're right.
Yes. And believe it or not, or coincidentally, both were one test wonders. So that's an
Yep.
interesting piece of trivia.
So, what is your memory of Sam and Doull's spell in the first morning? I remember waking up and I had no idea what had happened. I was just settling in front of the TV.
So I think I missed the first wicket, which was Sidhu, but then I watched the next few fall, and I agree with you. In retrospect, when you look back at it, it's not Jimmy Anderson moving the ball and making the batsman look like a bunny in peak English summer. I think he bowled in good areas, quote unquote good areas. The length was good. He kept it outside the off. He brought it in, brought it back. But you could see that there were errors that the batsman had made. Right, Sidhu drove. I think Shastri was on air and called it like a lazy shot. Dravid will talk about the LBW, but got too far across, and Ganguly just poked one out that was moving and moved his feet. So it kind of went back to how India would typically play in a first test match on a first morning, right? That was always the danger, that you put them in and the first 10-15 overs is kind of where you would eventually end up losing the test match. For the life of me, I never really understood why we opened with Ajay Jadeja. Like, I loved him in ODIs, but I never thought he was a test player. And I think they kept trying this experiment on and off again to get him to open. He had some success at home, I think against New Zealand only in '95, if I'm not wrong. But I don't think he was somebody who could open overseas. But to Doull's credit, he, as I said, he bowled the right lengths, and he was troubling us in that first hour. And he had the look of this really mean, fast bowler. Ball. He had like a earring on his right ear, and all he needed was like a Harley Davidson jacket behind him, and that would kind of make him look like a typical bad guy. But as we all know, he's one of the most genial people, and he's made a name for himself in post IPL world. And amongst all of the commentators in IPL, he's one of those that I still think brings in a lot of good insights and leads the game well.
Yeah, that's true. He's like, even when I see him on commentary now, I mean, he's one of the best commentators, of course. But for some reason, my mind always goes back to the spell. It's as if the rest of his career like pales into insignificance compared to this extraordinary morning that he had. And I'm sure he's bowled equally impressive spells in other matches, but somehow this kind of, at least perhaps because I'm an Indian cricket fan primarily at that time, this has a lot, much greater weightage.
I think he had a few fifers against South Africa 3 or 4 years ago, but he had a start career and suffered through injuries. And one interesting thing about this is that I think India were all out in 65 overs, and he bowled about 24 of those. So he bowled a significant chunk, and Fleming kept him on for a while.
Aftab just mentioned about his look. Funny that, he actually was talking about it in a recent podcast, where I think that look cost him his place later on in his in the team, because they were looking for well-groomed people who look disciplined, etc. And he was told that he doesn't have a space in the team any longer. I think something like that. The story goes along something like that, if I'm not mistaken.
So talking about the winning the toss and batting first being the right thing, if this test happened after India became a dominant team, this test would have fitted, and let's say India had won the test, all those standard templates of a great team taking on the odds to get a precious away win would have fitted perfectly. India won the toss and they were not scared to bat first. And even after batting first, they lost 4 wickets pretty quickly, but they came back from there with a brilliant counter-attacking 100 from Azhar. Then the familiar problem of not being able to dismiss the lower order came through in New Zealand's innings. But again, India comes from a first innings deficit by batting big in the second innings, and Sachin plays a stellar innings. In many ways, the Sachin second innings 100 is very, very similar to the 155 he scores at Chennai against Australia. There's a first innings deficit. He comes out attacking, all guns blazing, puts on a scintillating stroke play exhibition, and gets the much needed momentum for India, a reasonable lead for India before a mini collapse. But if India had gone on to dismiss New Zealand in the fourth innings. This would have been one of those great stories, right? This would have been very similar to the Headingley Test narrative that we talk about under Ganguly. So there were a lot of things that India did right, except that because of the eventual collapse and eventual inability to close out the test, this test kind of gets clubbed into the typical 90s loss in many ways. Honestly, I didn't see it so positively then. I was just disappointed. I just thought this was one of those typical India's away losses. But now when I look back at it, there is so much to take from this test.
The innings which Sachin played, I don't know, for some reason, in the first innings, the 47 that he hit, right, I just thought that it was just a brilliant innings along the lines of the innings that VVS Lakshman hit in Zimbabwe right after his 281. Sachin was fresh after his century at Sharjah, with that final against an ODI against Tolonga and co. I just thought that Sachin was really positive. And regarding the two spinners, I agree that India erred probably to select both Harbhajan and Kumble. Obviously, Kumble was supposed to be there. On the other hand, I thought even New Zealand selected two spinners, and Wiseman never even got a chance to bowl in the first innings. That day, he was not needed. The way that test unfolded, honestly, after the first innings, I lost all hope. I thought, same old story abroad, etc., etc. But the way India came back in the second innings, especially through that innings that you just spoke about, and I completely agree with you about the similarities between that and the Chennai 155. The way he dismantled Wiseman. I remember the commentators, a lot of new commentators had come in, if I'm not mistaken. Danny Morrison, I was hearing him for the first time. Sanjay Manjrekar, I don't remember Sanjay Manjrekar before that. I thought that was his debut series as a commentator. I could be wrong. And, we were getting a lot of fresh perspective.
I actually looked at it as a missed opportunity. So it wasn't as bad of a heartbreak as maybe, what 81 all out was. And I thought it was a brave call to play two spinners. I felt that at that point of time, Harbhajan had this bit of a mystery element to him, and he could have troubled New Zealand because they hadn't played a lot of him except for Sharjah in 98. Especially on a fifth day pitch, right, when they were doing the chase in the fourth inning. I genuinely felt that there was a good chance both Kumble and Harbhajan could turn it on. And to your point, I think it was very pleasing to see that the batting actually adjusted very quickly and had a very good comeback in the second inning. So going into the final, they actually thought odds were even. And in fact, I felt it was more tilted towards us because I think Astle had retired hurt, so New Zealand were effectively 6 down in a way. But as was the theme throughout that tour, they batted very, very deep. Vettori was batting at, I think, 10, and that was their strength in that series, that they had the likes of Nash-Vettori, Kane, much lower down the order to recover and help them recover from top order collapses, which similar to what happened with England in 2018. And I think that kind of ended up making the difference, both in both the test matches, because India had opportunities, they just couldn't break through the lower order both those times sufficiently quickly to give them the initiative.
The first test match at Dunedin, which was washed out, apparently there was this, ODI, unofficial ODI that actually took place under lights. So imagine India under lights playing with the red ball and unofficial ODI, and they got absolutely hammered, if I'm not mistaken. So they had this practice against the swinging ball because apparently the ball was moving around a lot. So that also added to the fact that India, I was confident because I thought that Sachin at number 5 was a very good move because Sachin batted at number 5, and if I'm not mistaken, in both the innings, Ganguly came before him, and I thought it was a good move because I, at that time, used to believe that you should shield your best batsman against the tough conditions so that he can come back and come later on and try and maximize the returns.
We're talking of Sachin at number 5. Do you guys remember if there was any reason given or was there any discussion around it? Because it came out of nowhere. Like, I was surprised to see that. And then I looked at the scorecard of the tour matches as well. He didn't play the one that we won at Wellington. He played the first one against Central Districts. So he played at number 4 in the first innings when he collapsed. And for some bizarre reason, when he scored that 154, he came in after Mongia, which is 7. So I don't know why he came in at 7, and then he scores at 100. And come the test match, and he bats at number 5. And I don't think he continued that in the second test. If I'm correct, he goes back to number 4. So it was practically tested for only one test. In a test in which he batted well as well. He batted well, and to some extent even Ganguly batted well. So I'm just curious as to why this experiment lasted, why this experiment came into being in the first place, and why it lasted only one test.
Yeah, and it's funny that they only did it in this instance, because I think when they went to South Africa before and when they were playing on green tops in Durban, he still came out to bat at 4. And that was true whenever India played away, either before or after this. When even 2002 England, I remember they didn't really move him around in the batting order too much. But yeah, I think Karthik would be right that we might have seen Doull move the ball around and pushed him down the order, which was very unlike Sachin, because he always wanted to take the challenge head on.
Let's talk a little bit about Azharuddin's first innings 100. This was essentially his comeback from. He was taking over the captaincy again, and he went through a phase where he was playing these quite brilliant counter-attacking innings for almost a couple of years. He was reeling off those big, hundreds. We'd seen it in Cape Town earlier. We had seen it against South Africa at home as well. This seems to be a continuation of that, really. And these counter-attacking Azhar innings are not. They're very unlike the early ones, like let's say the Lords or the Adelaide's ones. There was a sense of maturity about this, but at the same time, he was very comfortable with taking disproportionate chances. So even if you look at the kind of boundaries, in fact, I was looking at the highlights. One of the rare test matches where we had a decent highlights package, and most of his boundaries were just square cuts or behind square, him throwing his bat at a wide ball. It seemed a very strange innings if you look at the scoreboard, you look at it as a very cautious sort of a counter-attacking innings, but it seems like almost, he could have been batting with Sachin on 100 at the other end and we wouldn't know the difference. It was that kind of an innings. I remember enjoying that innings immensely watching then. What are your memories of that innings?
So one thing I forgot to mention early on in the podcast when we were talking about the setup to the series, one of the other reasons why I felt the world was good and everything was, in shape was because Azhar was captain and he had a moustache. I think I mentioned this on the previous podcast we did when we spoke about the 96 tour, that whenever he had a moustache, he played well and India did well. And he had to be captain. I never liked Tendulkar being captain, honestly. But I think you're right. It was a very mature innings and with very, flashy square cuts, which is not what you associate with him. He hit the ball really hard whenever he flashed outside the off stump. And I honestly felt that I was watching that India would be all out for under 150. Like we were pretty much down in the dumps at about 148 or 49 for 8 or something like that. But he shepherded the tail well with Kumble, Srinath, rotated the strike well, got us to a reasonably respectable total. If there was a captain's knock, this is 8. But as with Azhar, there's this sense of romanticism with all his innings because the best ones have unfortunately come in losing knocks, and this was another instance. So I felt bad. Another reason why I felt bad about the result was that on the first morning he had played this brilliant knock, and it'll be forgotten in the history of Indian cricket because the test match itself was lost. But imagine if we had won the test match, right? It's an away series when it comes after you've been blown away on the first morning, and the captains played this kind of a counter-attacking innings to save the team.
I remember the first ball he got was, I think, along his pads, and he flicked it for 4, and then it got going. He gained some momentum, and he got a lot of short balls, and it was very measured, the singles and then the cut shots, etc., etc. I was really happy to see Azhar playing like this, and I was really hoping that eventually the spinners would come and hit them big. I remember in this series probably in the ODI leg, if I'm not mistaken. He hits one six of Vettori inside out, and Ian Smith or Jeremy Coney, I don't remember who's the commentator, he says that that shot is illegal in New Zealand. How do you play that? I was hoping that Azhar shows some of that form, because he had done the hard part. He had gone till 100, and Prasad was actually batting decently. So I thought that we if we can just push the score somewhere beyond 250, it'll be great.
Yeah, two more points on that. Karthik mentions him hitting Vettori. I think he played a great knock in Auckland, maybe in the fourth ODI that India won, where he hit like 2 or 3 really massive sixes, and that was again a very fluent knock, and that was Azhar at his best with his footwork. So he had patches of brilliance throughout that series, played reasonably well. And then on Venkatesh Prasad, it was interesting to note, I think Prasad had a better series with the bat than with the ball. He scored 45 runs in 3 innings, and his highest test score came in that Hamilton test, 30 not out, which was interesting. I was a little disappointed by his bowling performance. I think after South Africa, the returns were a little underwhelming for him.
Talking of Prasad's batting, one is the number of runs he scored, and two is the amount of time he spent at the crease and sort of gave company to a more accomplished batsman. What is it about tailenders, and especially Indian tailenders, who go through these phases of very, very impressive batting exploits, but essentially it's just a small phase? Like, you remember Zahir Khan, for instance, who was a very, dogged batsman for a while. Srinath himself has had, even in this series, he has a very impressive innings, and he's had quite a few impressive innings. Harbhajan has scored a couple of hundreds in a series. So they go through these phases, and I mean, it's unfair to categorize Harbhajan in the same league, but the larger point being that they go through these phases of very impressive sort of batting exploits, but somehow that doesn't sustain. Like the 99 Chennai test is barely a couple of months after this, Either Srinath or Prasad in this form would have been handy.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I thought Srinath always came across as like very moody with his batting, right? So he was, if he was in the mood, he would hunker down a little bit, but you always knew that he was restraining himself and he just had to hit out. Prasad, for the life of me, I think this series is an exception. I never really trusted him with the bat in hand. But maybe my hypothesis is, it's partly just a little bit of lack of focus, and partly sometimes it's the conditions, right? The bowling attack that you're up against and the pitch that you're batting on, like at Hamilton. All said and done, it was a good batting track, and if somebody applied themselves for a reasonable amount of time, they could have survived. But at Chennai, he was in a different kind of a situation, under a lot of pressure and facing a different kind of a bowling attack.
And the one tailender that I thought was actually batting decently was Dodda Ganesh in that Cape Town test. And Sachin himself made a statement that, I was confident he would hang around. But then we have a history of lower order batsmen, even Kumble, who was fairly decent. But then you never knew when he tried to play his flick, which ended up as a cover drive, edging to the slip, or, his patented shot that he used to do. It was kind of disappointing, because whenever you go abroad, you see the lower order of the opposition causing you so much headache, be it Ronnie Irani or Franklin Rose, or I don't want to call Lance Klusner a lower order batsman, but he came down in South Africa and hit those hundreds. So it was kind of frustrating that India was at the receiving end of all these innings, and our batsmen could seldom replicate that, or our lower order batsmen could seldom replicate that.
Talking of India's typical sort of fatal flaws of our away performances, we always complained about the fact that the lower order of the opposition always found a way out of the pressure built, and in this test, for instance, the Nash-Vettori partnership was what took the game away from India. For instance, I think the scores were level with 7 wickets down, and then from there Nash and Vettori kind of take the game away from India. But a lot of the typical sort of complaints of partisan Indian cricket fans used to be that we drop a lot of catches and we don't take our chances and we let the lower order score runs. But this was a series where both teams were guilty of that. New Zealand dropped a lot of catches, we dropped a lot of catches. Nash and Vettori scored, and then they let Prasad survive, and then Srinath score in the next test. So in many ways, this series, and especially this test, was a seesaw of both brilliant performances and substandard performances. In fact, that the Indian fielding epitomizes that quite well. Dravid at first slip drops an absolute dolly, and at short leg takes an absolute blinder of Craig McMillan. Jadeja, if I'm not wrong, drops a catch at square leg. I think it was a setup for a pull for Matt Horn, and he drops it. But he also runs out Stephen Fleming, running in from short leg. It was that kind of a series where there were moments of sparkling brilliance and moments of real mediocrity from both teams.
If you talk about one of the lasting memories for me in the series, I have like few, but one lasting memory of this series was Srinath fielding at slip. I don't know if you remember, but he dropped a couple of catches in the second test. I mean, how can you have Srinath at slips? So that basically defined the series, fielding effort by India in this series. Dravid dropped a sitter, if I remember, of Prasad, and Prasad was really upset about it.
It was a bizarre sort of mix of slip fielders. There was Dravid, who's an accomplished slip fielder, or at least who showed promises of being a good slip fielder at that time. Azhar, who was an accomplished slip fielder himself. But we had all kinds of people standing in slips. Dravid dropped a catch, then he came to short leg, then Ganguly went and stood at slips. And the way Ganguly positions himself at slips is so comical. It has to be seen. I mean, I thought Mohammad Kaif is the funniest ever at slips, the way he positioned himself. But Ganguly comes pretty close to that. So whatever happened during the Duncan Fletcher era of rotating slips seems to have happened to a much worse degree earlier itself. Let's talk about the brilliant passage of play about Sachin's second innings 100. I want to kind of set the context of Sachin's career at this stage a little bit here. So he comes off, essentially, like I said, he went from a hero to a god somewhere during the course of the year, where he had a phenomenal series against Australia. He won the battle against Wani, and then he pulled off some brilliant victories in one days as well. And this was before the next bogey of Chennai 99 that is pretty much attached to him for the rest of his career. So this was the phase where he could do anything, right? Everybody imagined he could do anything. There was no restriction, there was no limitation to what he was capable of. Which post 136, you can't say that, right? The baggage of, he can't finish it off started taking its own shape. So in that little space where the expectations are humongous, and he comes out and he plays such a breathtaking counter-attacking innings. I mean, 100 of 120 odd balls even now is seen as a very, very attacking innings. And at that time, in that situation with a fairly big deficit, was quite a stamp of authority. It was obvious that this is a genius coming out and establishing himself. And some of the drives that he played, oh God, there was a straight drive that he plays of Chris Gaines. Oh my goodness. It was a sight for the gods.
I remember that straight drive, yes. I think the camera follows the ball very closely after that, in the replay, if I'm not mistaken. It was brilliant. Surprisingly for me, for some reason, I thought his innings in the first innings, which is the 47 he hit, was like brilliant. He was just teeing off at the top of the bounce. He got caught at leg side. I think it was an error of judgment or something. He flicked the ball and got caught at the short, or rather square leg, short mid wicket.
He flicked it in the air at square leg against the run-up play.
Absolutely. So when he came back in the second innings, I had this feeling that yes, we're going to see something special from him, because he's in good form. It's not like he's struggling or and I thought one other thing that helped or aided India and Sachin was the pitch had eased up. For some reason, Fleming kept bowling the spinners a lot, and Sachin made sure that he dominated against Vettori and Wiseman. And by the time he could fall back on his quicks or something, Sachin was already established, and that was a brilliant innings, I thought.
But the other peculiar thing about this innings is that this was also a season where he was getting to his hundreds with a six, right? There was a I think Min Patel in 96 England, he scores 100 with a 6. This one he gets to 100 with a 6 of Daniel Vettori. And like you mentioned, Fleming bowling the spinners. I think Paul Weissman was getting a lot of grip and turn on this wicket. In fact, he got Dravid into quite a bit of trouble, eventually, getting him out as well. So Fleming thought there's enough purchase for both the spinners to exploit, which is probably one of the reasons why he kept the spinners going. But that's an aspect of Sachin's batting which is not often talked about. That I mean, we talk about it with reference to Sehwag, but Sachin also had this habit of trying to reach his 100 with a 6 at one stage of his career. Even, I think, if I'm not wrong, the 2001 Chennai Test, he scored his 100 with a 6.
One interesting thing about Sachin in this Test match that I thought was his constant duel with Craig McMillan. I think Craig McMillan was this upstart, but at that time, I think he had just debuted the previous year, if I'm not mistaken, against Australia. He was this. I think he could bowl pretty decently. He was not like the bowler that he went later on, but I think he was bowling fairly medium pace at that time, and he was obviously a star batsman in this series. So I remember his bowling to Sachin and him giving a stare to Sachin. And the other thing that I thought about Sachin in this innings was his sweep shots against probably Wiseman, of course. He didn't employ, if I remember correctly, he didn't employ the paddle sweep, which is being talked about on Twitter of late. I don't think he employed the paddle sweep. Instead, he went for the conventional sweep, and I thought he swept really well in this test.
I mean, given how much he practiced for Wani before the series, to get maximum value for money, he just continued playing the conventional sweep for a while longer.
Probably, yep.
Okay, let's move on to the fourth innings chase a little bit, which is the pain that we've all felt more than once in the 90s with India. So off to a very impressive start. Srinath gets Matthew Bell out pretty soon. Azhar was injured, as Aftab mentioned earlier. 51 for 3, but effectively 4. 64 for 5 practically. Then Weissman gets out. In the sense that it was all set for an Indian victory. I don't know how to put this, but somehow this should have been one of those Hall of Fame heartbreaks. But somehow it doesn't quite have the pain of an 81 all-out or even the third test in South Africa in 96, for instance, when we had some chance and Kozner and Cullinan batted out. Is it the same for you guys as well?
I'll be really honest. I don't rate this as a heartbreak at all. In fact, I thought I was from the position that we were in. I thought we had a good chance, but it doesn't. It come near 81 all out or the other one that you mentioned, because I honestly feel that in this Test match, I remember the India South Africa series in South Africa. Kumble at the back of his performance in India. And there was a lot of expectation out of him, and I expected a lot out of him. And Kepler Wessels are apparently told the South Africans to stop treating him like a spinner, treat him like an incoming bowler. I mean, a medium fast bowler who bowls in duckers or who cuts the ball into you. And that's how they tamed him apparently in that home series. And I thought New Zealand played him in this series fairly similar. I had a lot of hopes again with Kumble in this fourth innings. I thought that with 67 for 4 or 74 for 5 next morning, it's set for Kumble to actually finish it off. But I thought Kumble didn't bowl the right lines. I thought he was, I remember quite a few balls, directed at the pads or going towards the leg side, and I thought Keynes and McMillan played him with, ease. I was slightly disappointed with that. So the pain isn't as high as, say, 81 all out.
Yeah, one interesting piece of trivia is India were beaten by 2 partnerships which are of both 137 runs each. So Nash and Vettori put on 137 in the first innings, and then McMillan and Keynes also put on 137 in the second innings. And I think the other thing, if I remember, for some reason,
and a couple of months later, 136 haunts us, or continues to haunt us till now.
Yeah. Yep, that is true. That is true.
Did you guys know this was a Boxing Day test? Like, for instance, Till I went back today, I didn't realize it was a Boxing Day test.
I actually had to check the dates, but there was no build-up or anything like that it was a Boxing Day test. But now I remember why I watched so much of it, because I wasn't having to go to school.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know, to be quite honest. I got to know that recently from Vijay that it was a Boxing Day test. It was the first ever Boxing Day test in New Zealand, and there were like obviously two other Boxing Day tests going on at the same time. The England Australia one, which was a thriller, the Dean Headley game, and the South Africa West Indies game at Durban. So interestingly, if you remember, there's this piece in Sachin Tendulkar's biography where he says that everything was closed for Christmas, and they were really starving for food. And some Gujarati, nice Gujarati people, a few Patels actually helped the team out with food and all, and they were really grateful to them. And Sachin fondly remembers that gesture of graciousness from that Gujarati family during this Boxing Day test. Interestingly, a trivia is that I thought this would be the first time 3 Boxing Day tests are happening, so I just went and checked. And no, apparently in 1996 you had 3 Boxing Day tests: West Indies, Australia at MCG, India, South Africa at Durban, and then you had that famous England Zimbabwe series, the flipping series.
The flipping murdered them.
Yes, absolutely, that series. So, interesting trivia. And staying on with that lower order, I just wanted to touch that slightly. I was just looking at some stats before this, and you would be surprised to hear that Dion Nash, who was the thorn in Indian flesh for a long time, scored more runs in the test series than Azhar and Ganguly. Like he scored 174 runs and Azhar scored 155 and Ganguly 165. And both Azhar and Ganguly had hundreds, and Nash didn't have one. He had a high 80s and then I think a 60 odd or something. So that tells you the difference. That right there, I think, tells me that where India lacked.
Okay, let's quickly move on to the third test, which was nowhere near as dramatic and nowhere near as entertaining. But it's still an interesting test because it got off to an interesting start. Srinath was off to a blistering start with a couple of wickets straight away and eventually ended up taking 5 wickets. But the test was always meandering towards a fairly pointless draw. Although it had its moments, Dravid played a magnificent innings in the first innings, scoring 190. We had the Srinath's magic-comical 70 as well. What do you remember from the test, apart from Dravid's twin hundreds?
So I think Rahul Dravid saved his ODI career in this test match. That is my hypothesis, because I'm not sure if I'm wrong on this, but I don't think he was originally going to be part of the ODI team. He did not play all the games in that Sharjah tournament preceding that. I think he played just 1 game. So he had kind of slowly faded out of India's ODI plans. And he had issues in terms of strike rate, and I think Chappelli was after his back, that he bats very slowly in one-dayers and hits to the fielders and all of those. And I think this test innings kind of gave him a lot of confidence, and because he scored twin hundreds, he was retained in the ODI team. And then he went on to make the 123 not out in Taupo. And Dravid was just a different player. A lot of his aggression was back. He played a lot of shots in the air, which you'd never seen him play in the ODIs. But in my mind, he effectively saved himself and his ODI career on the back of this performance and the double hundreds. The test hundreds were just typical Dravid, carrying on from what was expected of him. But it had much more significant consequences for him in the longer arc of his career.
Are you implying that Dravid's second innings 100, which was a very aggressive 100, was played with a mind on one-day selection? Are you accusing Dravid of having ulterior motives when he was trying to save a test?
No, not at all. Rahul Dravid, when it comes to Indian cricket, is even above Caesar's wife. I'm only implying that the selectors in their exercise their wisdom and decided to keep him on for the one-day series.
But tell me something. Has he scored 175 strike rate outside of this? Has he scored 175 strike rate outside of this innings?
It's an interesting point, but then I think you also have to see the context and who was bowling. Like it's McMillan bowling at 120 clicks and trying to bounce him out. Wiseman, Doull. Those were the folks who bowled most of the overs. I think there was a buffet for offer, and Dravid, being Dravid, doesn't miss out on those opportunities. But the other thing also was the moment he got his 100, the match was over. Like so, effectively, I think on that last day they were just waiting for Dravid and Ganguly to reach their 100s, and the match was called off the moment he reached his 100.
This was the one of the easier ways in which Sourav Ganguly could have got a Sena 100.
Actually, coming into the series, you won't believe Ganguly was averaging 46 with 5 centuries, and Dravid was somewhere in the late 30s with just 200s to his name and none at home. He scored that 100 in Johannesburg, the beautiful 148 that he did. And then he saved India from some blushes in that one-off test in Zimbabwe, which no one saw.
Sorry, Karthik, I just have to correct you on that. Dravid was averaging 50 coming into the series.
Was he? Okay.
Yeah. Because I remember he had a series of, I think he scored 6 successive 50s in that Australia series in Calcutta when he scored the 50. That was his 6th consecutive 50, which was an Indian record, I think. Before that, GRV had done it.
Okay, my bad then. For some reason, I might have goofed up. But one thing that we all remember is Dravid and his struggles to get to 3 figures. He lost an opportunity in the West Indies. He lost an opportunity in India. And finally, I think he got it in the Joburg test. And this going into the Hamilton test, he obviously struggled in Wellington because I thought it was not a good way to get out to an incoming ball, for duck in the first innings. And then really, I thought Wiseman got into his head because I really think Wiseman was getting a beautiful drift away from the bat and then was turning it in, and he beat him, if I remember correctly. And the next ball, he went for this hike and got bowled. And I really was worried. I mean, for Dravid, but I think he redeemed himself beautifully in the next test. And those twin hundreds, I remember very clearly Ian Smith saying that he has put on a batting clinic. Very fondly, I remember that because I was so happy for Dravid. The other thing about his twin hundreds was like it was a feat that Sachin didn't have it till then. I don't think Sachin even has it even
Sachin
now.
never had it, right? Yeah.
Sachin never had it, and only Gavaskar had it, and Dravid emulated him. So I thought it was a very special feat, and Dravid, I think, went on to do it once more at Kolkata against Pakistan, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, correct. But tell me something. Azharuddin scored 100 when team was down in the dumps. Sachin scored a brilliant 100 when the team was, behind in the first innings, taking on a big deficit and setting the match up for India. Dravid comes and scores 2 pointless hundreds. But nobody says Dravid scores pointless hundreds. Had it been the other way around, you know where I'm getting it, right?
No, but I think the interesting thing is, for a long time, none of his hundreds were also coming in a winning cause, right? You look at Joburg, you look at Harare, you look at Hamilton, and it changes after England. In fact, Eden Gardens, where he then resurrects his test career because he's on the chopping block almost there. But then after Eden Gardens, then effectively a lot of his hundreds come in match-winning causes, right? And then that starts coloring the perception of each and every knock that he's played in a certain way.
I thought that, going into the 5th day, there was a thought that India, if New Zealand do a sporting declaration, India might go for the runs. I honestly thought India, might, if New Zealand play ball, I really thought India would have a chance of considering, Sachin, Azhar with their attacking shots and all. But that was totally killed. The only interest that was left in that game is will Dravid get to his 100? And I think they extended the play after that 30-minute, by the time it's 30 minutes to the end, you can call it a draw, shake hands and go. But I think they extended it after that to allow Dravid to go to his 100. End of the day, I thought that it's better to have 1-0 under your belt rather than 0-1 under your belt rather than 0-2. The interesting thing is that Srinath got his fifer. He got a fifer in this test, and Srinath's fifer were rare. Fifers were rare if you remember. He got one, the first one quite late in Ahmedabad against South Africa. Then he got his next in South Africa in '97, I think. And then this was his third fifer, if I'm not mistaken. Prasad he got one at Lords as soon as he got in, and you always used to wonder why doesn't Srinath get fifers in this game. And it so happens that this test is Robin Singh Jr.'s debut, and he honestly, I thought he didn't do very bad. I thought he would have warranted another test rather than being a one-test wonder. But Srinath, after hitting those 76 runs in the second innings, Srinath didn't open the bowling. It was actually Robin Singh Jr. and Prasad, which was baffling, to be quite honest. And I honestly did not think the reason as to what it could be. So before coming in here, I did some research and I figured out that apparently Srinath hadn't changed his boots from his batting boots to his bowling. So he could not run. He was slipping. So he had to go and get it changed. That was the reason. And I think India lost crucial momentum then. Robin Singh Jr. was like carted around and could have, should have, would have, I suppose.
That is bizarre because Srinath got out, I'm just checking the scorecard, when it was 355 and India went on to score 416. So there was Dravid who got out after that and Robin Singh got out after him. And yet he didn't change his boots.
Absolutely. Yeah, actually, one other thing about this test was I thought Sachin was looking good, to be quite honest. I thought he'd get another 100. But he got this contentious LBW call, if I recall it correctly. There was an appeal and Sachin wasn't given out, and then immediately the same ball happened again and Sachin was given out. So Sachin and these borderline calls, it's not something that happened for the first time at Adelaide in '99. This was the precursor, I suppose.
Okay, let's close it off with your sort of impression of the series on revisiting it. What is it that you found something new or something very different from your memory? Like, for instance, I'm sure you must have read something. You must have there's a good highlights package on YouTube of the second test at least. Did you find anything interesting, anything curious, anything that you hadn't noticed before?
Yeah, I was surprised to see the consistency of both Craig McMillan and Nash. Like, I remember both of them playing well through the series, but when you kind of take a step back and look at scorecards in aggregate, you kind of see them coming out almost as MVPs.
One thing that I realized while coming to this podcast was that this was the last test for Azhar outside Asia. It was, little did we know that he played this test in Jan 1999. Little did we know that in a few months, the decade, the millennium is going to come to an end, and so is Azhar's career, which I thought was probably a little strange because I really thought, things could have been different. Azhar might have played a couple of more years. And this was also Sidhu's last test, the Hamilton test, because after that, India moved on to S. Ramesh against Pakistan. But I do have fond memories of Sidhu opening the batting, especially against Australia. He was the one who unlocked one in that test series at Chennai. After that, Sachin came. So,
that was a wrong move. We lost a great fielder.
Jaunty, yes.
Okay, one thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that when I was watching the YouTube highlights, the commentary seems to be so much about essentially going by the result, right? Like, for instance, the LBW of Dravid in the first inning, Simon Doull bowling it full, and the ball was moving around quite a bit. But Dravid had this big stride forward, and the ball hits right on top of the knee roll. Like, in the DRS era, your gut call would be it's not out, and you'll wait for the replay. But umpire gives it out, and the commentators are talking, oh, it's so obvious. It's as if the most obvious decision in the world. And it's not. I'm not talking about bias here. It's just that even when Adam Perore, for instance, is out LBW offering no shot to Kumble, I don't think any modern umpire, like today, it would not be given out. Forget DRS or not, it would not be given out. That's fine, umpire gave it out. But commentators are simply going by the result, offering no shot, that was plumb, going straight on. There was another decision which was not given. I think it was Matthew Bell, and it was not given of Prasad, and that looked absolutely plumb. And Manjrekar there on commentary is making a case saying, oh, the angle will take it down the leg side. I mean, today, what I'm trying to get at is the fact that that while even without using the DRS, now that we have watched cricket in DRS, our perception of an LBW decision has changed so much subconsciously that it sounds amusing when we go back and see some of the old videos and listen to the commentary.
One of the things why I thought that, Manjrekar or Shastri or, Dion Nash, sorry, not Dion Nash, Danny Morrison, were like, talking like that, what I would probably think that it was definitely Manjrekar's or Morrison's initial assignments, and they might not have, they would have just gone with the flow. But in general, I would think, the mindset itself has changed right now. Earlier, it was like, if it hits on the pad, benefit of doubt should go to the batsman. If not, then the umpire is really sure, so that's out. But over now, the mindset is that even if it hits on the pad, umpire has given it out. There's enough doubt, we have enough evidence to overturn it. So let's go for the DRS. I think that mindset has crept in, even in the commentators.
Okay, with that, we are about to close off the pod. Any predictions for the series coming up, the Test series?
Well, Rohit is not playing, so how will India win?
That's my dialogue. You can't take it. Come on.
I'm excited to see, fingers crossed, Shubman Gill play. I think it's a great opportunity for him. Whether they go with him or Prithvi Shaw, I think either one of those would be interesting to see how they cope in these conditions. I think Gill might pick him given how well he's played in the A Tour. New Zealand are difficult to beat at home, so I'm kind of on the borderline here, but I'll probably go with either a 1-1 or maybe a 1-0 victory for India. I'll be a little bullish just on the back of how well the Seamers have done off late this season.
Yeah, heart says 1-0 India, but mind says 1-0 would be the final result. It won't be easy for sure. India is playing well, but the conditions would be challenging up front at least. So let's see. My prediction is 1-1.
I mean, if Rohit Sharma was in the team, I would have predicted 2-0, but now I don't care.
People might think that Rohit Sharma might have extended his career by getting injured at the right time. Not me, but
the same people who thought he'll be a sitting duck against Rabada when opening the batting.
But that was on home pitches. Now he's avoided tough tours.
No, but even on home pitches, they said he'll be a sitting duck against Rabada.
Doesn't he have a better record than Bradman at home, if I'm not mistaken? Or is it second best to Bradman?
So second best to Bradman, I think.
Probably better than Bradman. No, second best to Bradman.
Okay, guys, it was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot for joining. And thanks a lot for listening. I know we took a small break, but we are back on track. And pretty soon we'll put out a preview for the series as well. Keep listening. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.